morning and welcome to your daily devotional. I'm Victor Tim and we're continuing our way through Judges. We're beginning Judges chapter 9 and we're looking at a new character, Abimelech. And Abimelech is an interesting guy. Before we get into it, we have to go back a little bit to verse 31, where it's talking about Gideon and all the children he had with all his wives. And in verse 31 of chapter 8, it's written, his concubine at Shechem also gave birth to a son. That son was named Abimelech. Alright, so this is at the end of Gideon's life. This is his kind of conclusion, and they include a very specific son, Abimelech. The child of the concubine, the child of not a real wife, but of outside of marriage. He isn't on the same foothold as the rest of Gideon's many children. And so that's who Abimelech is, and today we're going to read exactly what Abimelech does. So let's get into chapter 9. Abimelech, son of Jerubbaal, from Gideon, went to Shechem to see the uncles on his mother's side of the family. He spoke to them and his mother's whole family. He said, "Please ask all citizens of Shechem what seems best to you. Do you really want all of Jerubbaal's 70 sons to rule you, or just one man? Remember, I'm your own flesh and blood." His uncles repeated everything he said to all citizens of Shechem. They were persuaded to follow Abimelech because he was their relative. So they gave him 70 pieces of silver from the temple of Baal-berith. With the silver, Abimelech hired worthless and reckless men to follow him. Then he went to his father's home in Ophrah. There he executed his 70 brothers, Jerubbaal's sons. But Jotham, Jerubbaal's youngest son, survived because he hid. All the citizens from Shechem and Beth Millo united. They went to the oak tree that was still standing in Shechem and proclaimed Abimelech king. So there's a lot going on in these few verses. First, we have Abimelech, an illegitimate son, a son outside of marriage, who goes to his mother's town of Shechem and he persuades, "Don't you know all of the sons of Gideon are going to rule over you? Wouldn't you rather just have me?" And of course this is a complete lie, because Gideon says, "I won't rule over you, my sons won't rule over you, Yahweh will rule over you." But Shechem is so greedy, he is so power hungry, he lies. He badmouths his father's name, and he lies to get the power and support he needs. And pretty soon his uncles start telling the whole town, and he gets the support, and from the fund for a temple to Baal, he's given 70 silver coins. And from these 70 silver coins, he goes out and he hires the most worthless men you can think of. The Hebrew is really worthless and wretched, worthless and reckless, vain and reckless. These aren't good guys. They're cheap, and they're willing to do whatever their employer is asking. And so Abimelech, with his now hired hands, go and they kill in Ophrah all 70 of Gideon's legitimate sons, except for one. So 70 minus 1, they only killed 69 of the 70 legitimate sons. They missed Jotham. But Abimelech thinks he's won. I guess he's not so good at math. So he goes back to Shechem victorious, and Shechem invites Beth Millo, and they come and they unite. And Beth Millo it was a monument in Jerusalem. So these are people from Jerusalem coming to Shechem, and they're becoming united. And they do it at that large tree in Shechem. And there they proclaim that Abimelech is king. Now, Shechem is an interesting place. Let's turn back to Joshua chapter 24, the end of Joshua. We're going to read 3 verses, verse 1 and verse 24 or 25 and 26. Joshua gathered all the tribes of Israel together at Shechem He called together Israel's leaders, chiefs, judges, and officers, and they presented themselves to God. That day, Joshua made an agreement for the people and set up laws and rules for them at Shechem. Joshua wrote these things in the book of God's teaching. Then he took a large stone and set it up under the oak tree at the Lord's holy place. So this tree that they are now pronouncing Abimelech to be king is in fact the very same spot where Joshua had re-established the covenant, where Joshua had reunited Israel with the God they had forsaken. And here at that same space, the people are now pronouncing a false king, Abimelech. He is not the king God has chosen, and yet they choose him. Today's story is one of greed and power and sin, and how Satan uses our own selfish desires for his good. Abimelech was not who God had chosen. If you notice, in this whole story, it doesn't say, and God called him or God chose him. No, Abimelech chose himself. Abimelech allows his selfish desires to control him. And now we might not be like Abimelech, who go and kill 69 of our 70 brothers to become king. But we do have selfish desires that we need to deal with. And we need to return to God in repentance and ask him to humble us and to remind us of our total dependence on him. So that way we do not go out like Abimelech and ruin our lives and ruin other people's lives for our own selfish desires, but rather that God humbles us and works through us to love and to serve the neighbors he puts in our lives. Abimelech it's not necessarily a cautionary tale, but it is an interesting one. And I look forward to continuing to walk through the story of Abimelech with you. Have a great day, Mount Calvary.